Hello, hello. Megan Thompson here with Megan Thompson Coaching, and we have Autumn Brennan, our teen coach and expert as well, with us today. Hi, Autumn.
Hey, how you doing, Megan? Thank you for having me on. Can't wait to have this conversation today.
Yes, so excited. So let's cover it. We are speaking about how to support your picky eater if you're parenting a highly sensitive child, especially if you're stuck in the meltdown cycle. Make sure that you stick around. We're going to cover all about how to support your highly sensitive child in getting curious about food and where you are stuck in keeping that cycle going. Perpetuating that picky eating, right? All right, so first and foremost, let's make sure that we're covering what we do, why we know what we're talking about, all that jazz, and then we'll get further into it. So again, if you are parenting a highly sensitive child and you're also stuck in the meltdown cycle, it's very important that you notice that this is a family dynamic issue. That means your child is hitting, kicking, screaming, yelling, melting down on a daily basis, multiple times a day, or multiple times a week. This is the meltdown cycle. Your child might also be shutting down or refusing or leaving the room, eloping in school, etc. And this is the particular specialty that we have here at MTC. We help parents break out of that cycle, eliminate those daily meltdowns in as little as 8 weeks through the work that we do for parents of younger children. And then parents of teens, we have a separate program where we work with parents and their teens to break out of that shutdown, isolation, refusal cycle. So Autumn's here because we collectively run the gamut in our age range expertise. So we're going to talk about this in different avenues because teen picky eating can show up way different than highly sensitive young child picky eating. So we're going to cover them both. So with that being said, when parents are stuck with that picky component of a child who is stuck, not able to eat at the table, refusing to eat at the table, etc., two things we need to notice. One is that neither of us are registered dietitians or formally educated nutritionists. So obviously, the focus of today's show is not to tell you how to feed your kid, what to feed your kid, or how much your kid should eat, okay? With that being said, we will break out of the meltdown cycle along with the picky eating cycle through the strategies that we talk about today. So it's really important that you notice we've helped hundreds of families break out of that meltdown cycle, and many of them have picky eaters that they've been supporting their children get more curious about different foods. So that's why we know what we know works and why we're going to talk about it today. So one of the things that I think is really important to notice, and Autumn, I'm sure that you've seen this over the decade plus that you've also been working in the field, is noticing where parents can get tripped up in highlighting the major issue of picky eating, right? So the main problem is dinner time. The parents are more visible too, especially if your kid's being schooled outside of the home. And the challenges around making sure that everybody enjoys the time together, making sure that your child is eating what is served, and even just coming to the table can all be lumped into the experience of a quote unquote picky eater, right?
Right. Even thinking about what this might look like for a teenager, I've had parents come to me and they're feeling a lot of fear, right? Because they're noticing my teenager is living off of cup of noodles, or my teenager is, only eating pasta, or noticing that, they are aware of the fact, right, because of everything that they've been told, that, having diversity in a diet, being willing to try new things, sitting down with the family at dinner, right, is important, right? This is important to the family system, and they're noticing their teenagers just no, I'm not doing that. I can't. No, I don't like that. Right. And maybe even stuck in wondering, where is that line between this is a problem and this is normal teenage behavior. right? And many times they're noticing when they try to push it, that's what gets this reaction, that now we're not in still the realm of this typical teenage behavior. Now we're swearing, we're yelling, we're crying over whether or not you're going to sit down and eat roast with the rest of the family.
Yeah. And we see the same thing with younger children, right? Highly sensitive kids, ages 3, 4, 5, all the way through 8, 9, 10, 11, having the same issue, only eating, white foods like macaroni and cheese, pasta, butter noodles, chicken nuggets, as long as the nuggets don't have black flecks on them, right? White bread, grilled cheese, anything like that. Just super plain foods and can just basically stick in the cheese and carb family. Or we've got kids who would lovingly be called a fruit bat in their home, which was my kid way back in the day. And when we were working on this in our own family and helping her increase the diversity of her diet. And addressing the particularities, regardless of how old your highly sensitive child is, they all stem from the same root, which is incredibly important for us to cover here today. But before we cover that, right, before we address how to solve it, we got to look at what parents are doing and that is keeping the cycle going, right? And on top of that, where you might be missing the mark as a parent if you're highlighting this picky eating cycle as one of the major behaviors that you need to be tackling when your child's melting down in or outside of the dinner table experience, right? So you might have a kiddo who's melting down when it's time to go for school, around homework, etc. And then also have a child who struggles around food, to get curious and to eat consistently a variable diet. And that can feel like two separate issues, right? So Autumn, you and I are going to talk about why it's the same thing. It's all coming from the same root, and where we can get tripped up, right? So one of the things that we know for sure is that when a child is stuck in the meltdown cycle, they're clearly emotionally dysregulated on a daily basis, even in or outside of that meltdown cycle, right?
Right. And sometimes we even might notice that you mentioned a bunch of different environments there, right? You mentioned school, you mentioned maybe just even being anxious within the family environment. Maybe there's siblings involved where your child starts to experience just anxiety or dysregulation, as we would say, changes in their emotional state. Just naturally, right? That's part of what's happening for them. They're struggling to regulate their emotions, across the board. And, I'm going to give you the example of a teenager. And when we think about how this starts to come together with eating, where we notice that they're, let's say, struggling because they're feeling really anxious about being around peers or around going to school. And then we notice that we want them to eat breakfast in the morning, right? But they're so anxious getting down the stairs to get to school that they look at food, and that's just not part of what their body wants them to do in that moment, right?
Yeah.
That's not on the top of the list. The bear,
right,
as we might say at school, is the top concern. And so in that moment, their body doesn't necessarily want to move towards what's going to be most nutritious for me, right? So they're not looking to solve this long-term problem of getting it proper nutrition like their parent is. They're trying to just make it through the morning, white-knuckling it, to be able to get to the place that the adults are expecting them to be.
Exactly. So if your kiddo is running from a bear in their own emotional state all day long, and this is really important for you to be cognizant of as a parent. If you've been following me for a while, following MTC for a while, you've heard us say that if your child is holding their emotions in and then exploding only at home, that doesn't mean that they're calm all day and that they've got a skill that they're demonstrating, right? It's very important that you don't look at your child's quote unquote effective behavior, quote unquote lack of quote unquote misbehavior as a skill, okay? When you're stuck in the meltdown cycle, that means your child is dysregulated all day long, and we have a big pervasive problem to address. And with that being said, some parents might see, oh, well, thank goodness, thank my lucky stars, my kid's major issues are only at home, right? think my lucky stars, my kids' major issues are only in one setting. Maybe this is with other caregivers instead of with parents, instead of at school. Doesn't matter, guys. If you're stuck in the meltdown cycle, those meltdowns are happening daily, then this is a pervasive issue. It doesn't matter where it shows up. But with that being said, the main concern that you need to be focusing on is noticing that your child is in that fear response, that dysregulated response all day long in different pockets. Now, you might hear me say that and then say, but wait a minute, I see my kid happy. Emotions are black and white. Okay? So it's incredibly important that we don't discount when your child feels a positive emotion. Great, that's good. They're not clinically depressed and can't get out of bed. But guess what? Clinically depressed children get out of bed. That picture of just mental illness is actually pretty ineffective to gauge. A highly sensitive child stuck in that meltdown cycle doesn't only experience negative emotions.
Right.
Just like somebody who's sad in their life and doesn't know how to manage their emotions and isn't skillful in adulthood never feels happy, right? But it's really important that we look at this in a bigger issue. So let's get back to picky eating. You were using the metaphor of running from a bear, right? If you're running from a bear, are you going to stop and eat a sandwich? No.
No. Everything in your body is going to be moving towards getting you away from that bear, right? You're going to be in your fight or flight. You are going to be concerned with the most prominent problem, which is your safety. And your digestive system isn't even turned on.
No, it's not working. Nope, not working. So, not just disinteresting, right? It's really important. We use the word picky eating because this is what parents use. You're listening to us. You haven't worked with us yet. We haven't helped you reframe that judgment. So we're going to use that judgment here in our free trainings because it's just what parents are using. It's what pediatricians are using, etc. So it's the label you're going to give your kid. But what's important to understand is the function of that behavior. That your child is doing this for a reason, and it's not because the pepper is too peppery. Now, let's be honest. It might be partly because the pepper is too peppery, right? But if that pepper is not getting in your kid's mouth and they've never touched the pepper on that chicken nugget, they've never tasted it, then you can jump to the conclusion that it's not because the pepper is too peppery, right?
No. It's that fear of what if the peppery is too peppery.
Exactly. So,
for teenagers,
you said the magic word.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to, we use this phrase at Megan Thompson Coaching, and sometimes the problem's not the problem. So, we see picky eating, but picky eating might not be the problem. The fear of uncertainty, but what if? What would that taste like? What if I don't like it? Am I going to be able to handle it? So, same idea when we think about teens. A teen that's in the lunchroom, parents noticing what they see is that they're skipping lunch. They're skipping breakfast and they're skipping lunch. When the reality might be, it's not that they're not hungry, it's not that they don't want to eat, but that's a social situation. Fear of being in a social situation, fear of other, students around them, peers, judging them.
You have to order something. Right? Talk to an adult.
Order something. You've got to talk to an adult. So, coming back to that, problem's not the problem. The not eating the food, even if we try to target it from that perspective, I don't think that we're going to get very far.
No, it's just a symptom of that underlying fear. And so when we look at that and breaking out of that pattern, it's very important that we also look at how does that fear pervasively address this issue? How does this show up in all avenues of your child's life, right? If you're stuck in the emotional experience of running from a bear on a daily basis, throughout your day, your body is constantly looking for things to get disgusted by in order to keep itself alive.
Right. And it can produce the sensation as a parent of, that whack-a-mole feeling, right? When you're going in to see different professionals because, picky eating, I'm worried about nutrition, and I'm worried about, what's happening there. So I'm going to go see, this professional, and we're going to try to target that problem. And, well, by the way, we're also having these meltdowns where we're hitting and we're yelling. And so we're going to go over here to this person to have, this set of problems taken care of. Mm-hmm. When the reality might be that the underlying cause, right, is really the same. Mm-hmm. That issue of not knowing how to help your child, or them not knowing how to decrease this emotion dysregulation they're experiencing, not knowing how to control these emotions.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so by being focused on the whack-a-mole, you actually increase your child's uncertainty that you can help them, because your child knows that it's not about the chicken nuggets in some subconscious way as well, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what's on the plate. They're going to come down to the table in a dysregulated mood. You could have served them ice cream with cherries on top, and if they didn't like cherries, they are not scraping that cherry off.
Right.
They are saying the whole thing is rotten, right? Yeah. And that's the experience of pervasive fear, of pervasive disgust, because when you are running from a bear, you need to make sure that you don't smell, and here I go getting gross, that you don't smell the dead carcasses, that you smell the carcasses that the bear has been gnawing on in the woods, so that you stay away from those carcasses, because the bear lives there. Right. Or other carrion. I can use the scientific word so people aren't puking while listening to what we have to say. But that's incredibly important. A biological component, right? And then same thing, we're not picking berries that smell sour to eat when we're in survival mode.
Right.
And so really, if you as a parent, go ahead. Sorry, I'm on a roll.
No, you are on a roll. I didn't want to stop you. You're really picking up on this, an awareness of, how strong different emotions are within our bodies. And, one of the things that we really help to teach parents at, as part of the coaching program is to understand different emotions and how they operate within our bodies, right? Mm-hmm. Because, emotions like disgust, we don't really think about that one very often, but it has such an impact on how we behave or how we relate to our environment, right? And so noticing that sometimes, when we're experiencing emotions more intensely, there's more subtle emotions, like disgust. I don't really know that I like the way that smells. For a highly sensitive kiddo, that's going to produce a stronger reaction, that stronger fight or flight response, than it might for somebody else. Create more aversion.
Exactly. So we're not saying that their aversion is wrong or irrelevant, right? Especially if you're a highly sensitive person whose sensation of smells is heightened compared to the average human.
Right.
And that heightened component gets even higher when your nervous system is on fire. And that's what we're talking about. And so when we think about even, teens that we've helped so far and the kids that we've helped and the parents that we've worked with specifically to address this, the targeted behavior gets to be gleefully ignored by parents because their kids start spontaneously eating different variable foods when we address the core issue. And your child feels validated in that experience because why? They know that when they're running from a bear, there's no way in heck that they are going to consider that poisonous berry and discover the difference between the red on the poisonous berry and the maroon on the berry that they're okay to eat, right? Because you don't have time to stop and look at those distinctions when you are running from a bear. And so your child feels completely disconnected from your conversation, aka lecture, at the dinner table, right? So this is where I was headed when I was on a roll, and we always tag team so well, Autumn, in terms of being able to notice that the hunger cues are ignored, right? The curiosity cues are wiped out. The fears is consuming, and when we see teens and kids feel regulated in their own emotions, feel regulated in their bodies, that has to come through the relationship with their parents. This is true for highly sensitive kids around the world. It's not just an only our clients thing. The research speaks definitively related to vantage sensitivity. When you change where you are working from, in your life's circumstances, then you build your skills faster. Highly sensitive kids outperform their peers, and they have a much higher likelihood of outperforming their peers in all avenues of their life. You've heard me speak about the possibilities for your kid in a different show. When they feel a positive relationship with their parents, when they feel emotionally supported by their parents, emotionally understood and supported. It's one thing of like, you do you, boo, but if your parent doesn't understand you, that's still confusing.
Right.
Right?
Right. And this, this really makes me think of just a classic teen example of, a parent trying to nurture a teen that's continuing to struggle with being a picky eater. The teen may have mustered just everything that they could inside of them to get down the stairs, to interact with the family that's in the kitchen that maybe they've been struggling to interact with, and they're doing the best to regulate their emotions to not create some kind of conflict, because they know that they might be walking on edge, right? Just going into this interaction, and teen reaches for that classic macaroni and cheese cup, and is making it for themselves, and maybe they are experiencing a lot of depression, and so maybe they're not letting on to their parent that this just took all of the energy that I had, right, to get down here, or again, maybe that there's that anxiety that is causing them to really struggle with interacting with other family members outside of their bedroom. Maybe they've had a lot of isolating happening, and sticking that macaroni and cheese into the microwave, and while they're standing there waiting, a family member comes up and might interact with them, asking them, well, do you want this to go with it, or do you want this, and really trying to be helpful in that moment, right? And no intent around disrupting, and because two family members are just operating on different levels of understanding of what's happening, the teen may really struggle with even considering another option. I need to grab my mac and cheese out of the microwave and get out of Dodge. Back to the safety of the room, right?
Yeah.
Because on an emotional level, they're struggling to figure out all of these different emotions that are swirling around inside of them, to even consider being curious about, well, what would a piece of ham taste like with the macaroni and cheese? Right? And they're thinking to themselves, I just need food.
You want me to talk about ham? I'm finally going downstairs and you need me to talk about ham.
Right. Why are you trying to force things on me?
What does ham have to do with spending time with the family? Can't you see I'm down here? So then,
you don't care about me, right?
Right?
And the parent's like, what do you mean I don't care about you? I'm trying
to enhance your experience. Dude, I'm just having an experience. Exactly. And so this is going to come out in all different kinds of behaviors, right? For a teenager, it's going to look different than for a kid, where they're, instead of ants in their pants, they've got mice in their pants at the table. Sure, you could think that means that they are hyperactive, or you could notice that there's a lot going on in their mind, and keeping their body still is just not part of the priority here. And we look at how kids regulate. All behavior is communication. So it's really important that we understand why your child is behaving in a certain way. What are they trying to tell you with that behavior? And what are they assuming that you already know, that creates a large wedge in between if you are not privy to how their brain works. So when we think about the incredible unlocking that the families that we work with get out of this whole support system and in following a strategy, the first component is really understanding the difference between a highly sensitive person and a non-highly sensitive person from the inside out, right? It's not just understanding like, oh, does my kid fit the criteria? That has nothing to do with anything, right? The 4 components of the personality trait is just one piece of the puzzle, right? In a 100-piece jigsaw, I could be saying 1,000, but I don't want us to go down that rabbit hole. Because you need to be able to solve the problem when you know the problem is not the problem, right? And breaking out of this pattern where trying to solve your child's big emotions by throwing things at the wall that sticks hasn't helped you. you've been stuck in this pattern of observing your child who has had meltdowns about chicken nuggets, meltdowns about mac and cheese, meltdowns about school, meltdowns about brother and sister, etc. And the bottom line is if they're having meltdowns and they're feeling out of control in their bodies, and that is a fear-based problem, that is a bigger than behavior problem, and you need to be focused on addressing it from a different perspective than the way that you've been doing it now. And so, sure, we can tell you where it's coming from, but that's obviously much more nuanced than just saying, "Oh, don't be afraid," right? We don't fix the problem by just telling your kid not to have it anymore. Same thing goes with not having with trying to eat the food that they don't want to eat, right? So what's incredibly important is that you need to understand how you are in the way as a parent, not just from a place of using the most ineffective strategy, by trying to get them to eat stuff that they don't want to eat right now, but absorbing from your own understanding of what you need to be highlighting and whether or not what you're highlighting right now as your kids' major issues is actually the main problem. Okay, it's not just a symptom. Kids chucking stuff across the room, that might feel like the major problem, right? But what's helping them wind their arm back is where we work, what we work on, right? And so when we think about being able to break out of that pattern, it's incredibly important that you focus on the 5 things that we say consistently here on our show. The first thing is noticing for you as a parent, where are you adding to the issue, right? It's not just what's on the dinner table. Obviously, your kiddo gets fed by you, and it's also true that they get emotionally fed by you. Highly sensitive children learn how to regulate their emotions, not by watching, but by specifically learning how to do it. Those subtleties are not picked up. They are not picked up by highly sensitive kids unless they are explicitly taught. And that's incredibly important that it happens through you. Children do not learn emotional regulation skills through any other adult other than their parents if they are highly sensitive. And so when we think about being able to break out of this pattern, I've helped hundreds of families do that. And we do that through the parent-child relationship. And that has to be done in a specific way. You need to be able to be playful about it. You can't just have conversations over and over again about how they need to be doing something different and why it's important to eat more than just those bland carbohydrates, right? And what happens to their bellies and all this jazz, right? And, if they don't want to brush their teeth, what they need to be doing instead so that they can, especially if they're eating all those carbs, and the sugar germ is going to eat their teeth, right? So all of that isn't working for your kid, and you know it. And that has to be shifted in a systematic way, because for you, that's incredibly overwhelming to hear us say that. That there are lots of approaches to the challenging behaviors you're seeing, and all of them need to be shifted. So obviously, you need to be able to do that in a strategic way, and a way that breaks down your own shame, because we know you've been trying. We know you've been working at this. You've been listening to us, trying to use Dr. Google, trying to, speak to other professionals. You might even be a professional yourself. Autumn and I can speak to the countless professionals that we work with in our clientele, because it takes an expert to turn this around. It takes guidance from an expert, and a lot of experts don't know how to turn this around in their own family, and there's no shame in that. With that being said, you need to be able to be insightful enough to notice when it's time to say, you know what, there's a better, faster way to do this. And you can hack that system, and there's no shame in that game.
And when you notice that it's time, we think about both the little guys and the teens, right? Our teens are going to be young adults soon. Our eating is a social practice in our culture, right? It's something that it's not just going to go away, right? This fear or this difficulty that they're having with picky eating, it's something that's going to become more emphasized as they shift into young adulthood, or going from being a younger child, moving into different kinds of social situations where eating is something that people do to gain connection, and it's almost keeping them from being able to access this fantastic opportunity to connect with other people if they're really stuck experiencing fear or experiencing uncertainty around eating practices.
right? And for highly sensitive kids who already feel, who, especially those stuck in the meltdown cycle, already feel different,
Right.
it's incredibly important that we work on creating more opportunity where they feel comfortable in social situations.
Right.
Because it's one thing to notice if your kid is an introvert. It's another thing to notice if your kid is a chosen wallflower because they feel uncomfortable.
Right.
And that's really important to shift that, right? Being able to notice, is your child choosing not to communicate with their peers and engage with their peers because they're afraid, because they're nervous about how things will go, and they're worried what will happen if their newfound friend becomes angry with them or doesn't want to play what they want to play, or doesn't like their sense of humor for older kids, right? Or doesn't like their interests. That's one thing compared to, what, actually, I prefer to be by myself because I feel comfortable by myself. That's a much different observation than a kid who isolates because they're uncomfortable.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. And just again, I'm getting stuck on the stealing. It's almost like stealing an opportunity, right?
Mhm.
By not helping them to regulate in around these food-based situations. Thinking about how many highly sensitive kids end up not wanting to eat lunch with their peers, right?
Mhm.
Because they can't handle it,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
or that end up fatigued or end up feeling malnourished at the latter side of their school day, right? Because
Mhm.
they can't eat
Yeah.
when all their peers are, and so they're lacking that energy, or so they may show up to their classes in a way that it's not going to be beneficial for them. They're not going to be able,
Right.
to be as present as they could be. Right? So
Mhm.
really taking care of this picky eating, taking care of the underlying issue related to emotion regulation is just
Mhm.
critical, really just critical in
Mhm.
helping them to not, develop from a physical standpoint, but also from a social standpoint.
Mhm. Exactly. Exactly. And when it all boils down to emotions, then it's a heck of a lot easier to solve faster.
Right,
Right?
right,
And with the right strategy. Again, like we said, those four components. The fifth one is being able to speak to a professional who knows what they're doing, who's been able to solve this problem with hundreds of families, and they can do that when those issues come up in different scenarios. Right?
yeah,
Having a professional with experience who can pivot and not track you with the whack-a-mole experience is incredibly important, right?
right,
This is something that we've worked with countless professionals around the world, just observing our clients who've contacted professionals before, and the major component of ineffective professional support is that the professional is noticing that the child's major behavior is exactly what you were picking up on, which is that picky eating or that hitting behavior, etc. Um, and the understanding that the problem is not the problem needs to be communicated to you in a clear and effective way. And whether or not our strategy is going to work for your particular family requires a conversation. How do we do that, right? Go ahead to meganthompsoncoaching.com/talk or meganthompsoncoaching.com/teen talk if you're parenting a teen with this concern. And that's a teen who's in high school age or up. And we'll have a conversation about where you're stuck. All right. We'll get a clear picture on all of the issues, not just the behavior that is your heightened priority. And then we'll cover where you want to go, what your goals are for your whole family, not just your particular child that you're calling for in general. And then we'll cover how to be able to break out of that pattern. And if what we do and how we do it is going to be a good fit, we'll tell you exactly how that works, and you can get started right away. Otherwise, we'll point you in the direction of something that's going to work, right? If your kiddo has some pretty severe issues with eating and there's no other underlying issue based on our conversation on that phone, then we very well might point you in the direction of a different professional, right? That would make sense. And so obviously we need to have a conversation about it. It's not something that just a quick message to us, email to us, or Facebook posts in our free Facebook group is going to solve. We need to be able to clearly take a look at it and ask the questions that we know lead us to an understanding of where you're actually struggling. And once you have that clarity and we have that clarity, then it's very easy to figure out what the next steps are and what you need to do to turn that around. Okay, we're happy to have that conversation. It's free for you, so it's a win-win. And with that being said, we were happy to speak with you. Thanks for taking the time, and we look forward to talking to you on the next show.